Welcome to Splintered Spirits, a podcast hosted by me, Gary, and John Santa from Santa Paranormal, where we try to prove and investigate John's theory on what spirits are. John believes spirits are the fractured memories of the living attached to the energy our bodies release when we pass. Part of the investigation is talking to other experienced paranormal psychologists, spiritualists, or mediums, experts who have been involved in this space for way more years than John and certainly way more years than me. I'm particularly fascinated with this world of mediums. Since John's brand is communicating with spirits in the unique way he does, understanding mediumship helps me understand him. If you've been listening to the podcast, you know that I think John is a medium. Maybe not in the traditional sense, but dude, there's something going on there with him. My guest today is truly an expert in this space, and I think he sheds a lot of light on the subject, and I'm especially excited to talk to him about how they test and certify mediums. Maybe he'll give me some pointers on what to look for and what to ask. Spot a fraud or something. Robert Ginsberg started researching the evidence for survival of consciousness soon after his daughter died in 2002. Devastated by the loss, as anyone would be, he needed science to tell him if she still existed in some form. In 2004, Bob and his wife founded the Forever Family Foundation, a global not-for-profit that educates the public about evidence that we are more than our physical bodies. Bob hosts the Signs of Life radio show, is past editor of Signs of Life magazine, and heads the foundation's Medium Evaluation Certification Program, and writes a blog at beyondthefivesenses.com. He is also the author of two books, The Medium Explosion and My Life Here and There. I'm going to show you those books right now. Both of which can be found on my bio and my link tree, so you can go there and click them and buy them for yourself. Bob and the Forever Family Foundation are currently featured in the Netflix docuseries Surviving Death. I want to welcome Bob to the pod, and let's get into the conversation. How you doing?
All right.
Thank you so much.
Glad to be here.
I appreciate your time. So, Bob, I like to start off asking everybody this very big and broad question because I think it lays a foundation for all the rest of your answers, okay? And it's this. What do you think spirits are?
Well, here we think of life in physical terms. We are our brains produce consciousness, and therefore, when the brain physically dies, so does consciousness, and we cease to exist. I mean, that's a traditional materialist, thinking. But there's a tremendous amount of evidence that shows that our mind or our consciousness or soul, if you prefer, can act independently of the physical brain. And what I mean by that is that the brain can act just as a filter of information, but when the brain is damaged and, the signal doesn't stop, the signal is still there. And there are things like mediumship and near-death experiences and ESP and telepathy that show that the mind, remote viewing, the mind extends beyond the brain. So I think spirit is energy. It's a long-winded way of saying, but spirit, is energy. And the reason that, for instance, you mentioned mediums, the reason some mediums are able to do what they claim is that it's still telepathy. It's still mind-to-mind communication. It just so happens that one of the parties involved in the conversation, the person in the spirit world, doesn't have a body, but they still have a mind. And that's why it's still, a telepathic, process. So I think that, spirit is just another word for energy.
Have your beliefs about that changed since, did you have different beliefs before your personal loss than you do now?
Oh yeah, absolutely. If we were having this conversation prior to 2002, I would think that somebody like me was, nuts, because,
Right.
the way I thought that, the brain defines who we are, and the brain produces consciousness. So, thinking that something survives. I mean, how could something survive? The body is no more. So I thought it was
Right.
wishful thinking, a product of grief, and but at least I was an open-minded skeptic. In other words, a closed-minded skeptic is something that's dangerous, because even if you're prevented with the evidence, you don't consider it or you ignore it. An open-minded skeptic just follows the evidence where it leads. And fortunately, I was open-minded, and it took me, I'd say, 7 years of this study before I relented. And
Wow.
and which I was a bit of a hypocrite, because here we had started this global organization, and I'm giving all these talks about consciousness and life after death, and I didn't fully buy in myself. I was open to it, but it was as if I was trying to convince myself. But with everything that I learned in the hundreds upon hundreds of books that I read and all the people that I interviewed, and one day I just woke up and said, well, this is it. I mean, you have to, if you want to do things in a scientific fashion, you have to just follow the evidence, and the evidence shows that the most plausible explanation for all these different phenomena is that we survive physical death.
Bob, was there one instance in particular that, or I'm sure there was many, but was there any one thing where you're just like, wow, that's all right, I'm in, like I believe,
Well, one of the early things was that soon after my daughter had died, I got involved with doing some research with some scientists that studied mediums, in university settings, and I had one scientist come to Long Island, where I was living at the time, and he did a huge lecture for us at a university. And we had about 500-600 people there, and he was giving a talk about evidence of an afterlife, and he was staying at my house. And prior to that, my wife had to get a new car. The lease was up, and she told me that while she was driving the car, it's something that she could only describe as Morse code was coming out of the radio. And she told me the cadence was like da 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 da. And I said, you know what? New cars always have electrical problems. When I bring it in for the first service, I'll have them take a look. And she said, yeah, but the radio was not on, because she doesn't listen to the radio when she drives, so she didn't. So I said, yeah, okay. And then I happened to be driving with her in the car a couple of weeks later, and I heard it. And I said, that's strange, because it was exactly the way she said it was. And I turned the radio off, and the same thing. And then 2 weeks later, I'm driving to work in my SUV that I had been driving for 3 years, every day. And out of the radio comes that exact same cadence. So I shut the radio off, and it still continues. And then right after that, that same cadence came out of everything in our home. It came out of electrical appliances, alarm panels, TVs, on or off, radios. I mean, this was really strange. So I told the scientist about that. I was the only person that I told. And he said, well, he was considering it. And then he went to do the lecture. And in the middle of the lecture, in front of 600 people, out of the PA system comes that exact same cadence again. And I had just told him about this. He just spotted me in the audience and looked at me, and I just, threw up my hands. I said, so we go home, and he says, look, we have to do an experiment. He was doing research with mediums. He said, he told my wife, I want you to light a candle for Bailey, my daughter. And she should ask Bailey if this was she that was sending this Morse code, so to speak. And he even mentioned the first name of the medium. So tell her to go to Janet, and that's it. So my wife followed directions. She lit a candle. She said, Bailey, I need you to do something for me, really important. I need you to go to this woman. She's a medium. Her name is Janet. I don't know where she lives. Just go to her and tell her whether or not this is you sending the Morse code. The next morning, I go into my office, and I sit down on my computer, and I turn it on. And the first thing I do, like most people, was I look at my email. And the first email was from this scientist, and it was a forward of an email that he had just gotten from this medium, Janet. And she said, I don't know what this is. I've never experienced anything like this before, but somebody is sending me Morse code. And
Wow.
and when I just, when that happened, I think I let out an audible like shriek, like, wow, I mean, how is that? My mind is racing, trying to think of all logical explanations. And, if you can rule out the possibility that somehow the scientist was in cahoots, with this medium, for what purpose, I don't know. He was doing scientific research. Then it really is incredible because, it, this stuff happened. I mean, I perceived all this code with my physical senses. Then the request was made to my daughter, in another dimension, and the directions were carried out. So that was something. Did it prove life after death? Not necessarily. It could have been psychokinesis, or remote viewing, or some sort of phenomenon.
Did
But
your daughter know Norse? Did your daughter know Morse code?
no, and it was very, very short. So I went online and I looked up, there were these translators where you could translate into Morse code. And the first letter was definitely a B, but it wasn't long enough to give, and it was code. I don't think it was actually Morse code. I just think it was her code. It was a
Got
way
it.
of geting our attention, and
I see.
and she did. So that was
I
one of
see.
the things that really like rocked my world.
It's very Interstellar. If you saw
Yeah.
that movie, but the reverse, where the
Yeah.
father uses the light, in this other dimension. You know what I'm talking
Right.
about?
Yeah.
It's,
Exactly.
it's quite wild.
Yeah.
Um, are you a religious person, Bob?
No, I'm not. I I never was religious, growing up. I tell you though, after my daughter died, I pretty much gave up religion. But over the years, I've become, much more spiritual. Yeah, in other words, I think there's a creative force. I think that we're all connected, and if you listen to many of uh, the physicists today, and you start talking to them, they say, you scratch your head, say, wow, they sound a lot like spiritualists because they're saying essentially the same thing. We come
Right.
from a single point of light. We're all connected, and so that, science and spirituality are not mutually exclusive like many people think. But no, I'm not I realize that a lot of people that believe in an afterlife, which I think is a poor term because it's just life. It's a continuum,
Right.
But in any
It's an
event,
interesting way to put it. Sure.
yeah, a lot of people think of the afterlife purely in a religious sense, that if you obey this rule and that rule and that rule, you'll go either here or there,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and that's, but that never made much sense to me. So
Well, it is if the powers that be want to keep the poor people in line.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
you know,
You know,
you give them a
the
set of
way,
you give them a set
exactly,
of rules.
the way it's about control. The way I think of
Yeah.
spiritualism is that it's religion without the rules. Essentially, you believe
Interesting.
in connections and love and compassion, but not tied to rules. The founders of today's modern day religions all came out of the ages of mysticism, which lasted for thousands of years, and they regularly commune with their ancestors.
Sure.
And so it was okay for them, but somehow along the lines it's okay for them to do it, but not us.
Well, look, Bob, when people go through what you went through, many people would just implode. And what you and your wife did was you took action with this Forever Family Foundation. So tell me a little, let's get into that a little bit because I love the fact that it's a nonprofit, that you're there to help people. So how did was that your way to get through it? And how did it come to pass?
Yeah, I mean, I was, I obviously, yeah, I was completely blown apart. I mean, I wanted to die after my daughter died. I went to sleep every night praying to the universe that I would have a heart attack in my sleep and not wake up. And every morning I would wake up and I would be pissed, that I didn't die. So, I mean, it was, it just, complete horror. And so I'm looking for ways, to survive myself. Initially, I wasn't looking to help other people. I was just looking for a way that I could get through it. So we found a support group. And my wife and I drove about an hour to the support group. It was for only parents who lost children. And by this time, I had already begun, researching, some of the various things that we're talking about. And during the meeting, every time that either me or my wife would raise our hand and mention life after death, the moderator would shut us down. So we don't talk about such things here. By the way, he was also a religious person,
Mm.
and he says, our purpose here is to learn coping mechanisms, for our grief, but that we don't discuss these things. And I
Mhm.
thought that was odd because every single parent in the room, that's all they wanted to talk about. I mean, what could give you any more comfort and hope than believing that your child survives in some form? So
Right.
what used to happen is that we were in New York at the time. We used to stand out in the parking lot after the meeting in the middle of winter, 10 degrees outside, and we'd hold our own. The parents would get together and hold our own meeting,
Right.
and then we said, well, there has to be a forum where people could get together and discuss and learn without the fear of being judged or labeled. And we started that's with these discussion groups, across the country. And one thing led to another and got more involved in the science and the mediumship and all that stuff. And it just kept growing and growing. And now we have 16,000 members in 76 countries. And,
Wow.
every day it just keeps, because people, I think another factor is people my age, like the baby boomers that never really considered, life after death. But now that they're reaching, older age, they're starting to question. So it used to be everybody that joined the foundation suffered a loss of some time, but now I've been noticing a lot of people that are simply curious. I mean, is there anything to this, or is it all bullshit? And
Right.
so they want to learn. So
Right.
it's another. It's feeding the foundation with a different type of member.
How does, how do you guys, what would you say is the biggest differentiator between how you support a grieving family than that traditional sort of method that you went through? Like, what is your, like, what is that sort of thing that you're saying to them to help them? And, or do you also provide that traditional sort of coping along with this?
Yeah, well, we hold these grief retreats. We hold 4 of them, throughout the year, and we have at each retreat we have a Dr. Mohana, who's a wonderful professor of psychology and a clinical psychotherapist, and she's the grief expert. But so to answer your question, if you go to most mainstream mental health professionals, for grief counseling, they teach you ways in which you should disassociate from your loved one. Okay, you have to move on with your life. This happened. It's a different life that we didn't want, but you have to learn a way to get on. And we sort of go the opposite route, where there's nothing wrong with maintaining a relationship with your loved one, just in a different way, and that seems to bring more comfort. It's sort of like, if you can change the way that you think about death, um, then it can have profound positive effects, on your grief. It's like cognitive behavior therapy. So if you believe, either through evidence or
Right.
through a powerful personal experience, that your loved one still exists. I mean, studies have shown that people who believe in life after death do better in their grieving process than those who don't. And that's not earth shattering. That makes sense, right? Because it
Right.
gives it gives you hope. So yeah, I mean, we try. We don't want people, to forget, and certainly they move on with their lives and they navigate this new life that was thrust upon them. But that love is always there, and there are ways in which you can optimize your chances of having a direct communication from your loved one.
When did you start to bring mediums into the mix?
Well, since the scientists that we were working with at the beginning were studying mediumship. It was a logical thing. I so mediumship, I say, is one of the forms of evidence that we're interested in. I think the two most powerful ones that caught my attention immediately were near-death experiences and mediumship. Uh, mediumship, mediums, as most of your audience probably knows, are people who claim that they're able to communicate with a discarnate, entity. Um, in my first book, The Medium Explosion, I didn't make a lot of friends because I said flat out that based upon my own research and everything that I've read, that 85%,
Yeah, I love that one. It's good.
yeah,
I haven't
yeah,
read it.
85 to 90% of the mediums out there today cannot do what they claim. I'm
Right.
not saying that they're fraudulent. I mean, a small percentage of them are, but we all have intuitive abilities in varying degrees, and they have some intuitive ability, but just not refined to the point where they can communicate with a discarnate source.
I spoke to a woman named Saman Key. Do you know her?
No.
She was a tutor at the Arthur Findlay School for many years, a medium. She used the phrase that I absolutely love called clairvagueness. And it's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
this idea of, she's like, I could sit here and do that to you and win you, and you'll be wowed by it because she's been
yeah,
doing it for so long. But it means not, it doesn't mean anything.
yeah, and a lot of the mediums, they use cold reading techniques and repeat the same information and all sorts of things that give you the perception that they're gaining. Also, there's a difference between psychic information and mediumistic information.
What's that?
So
What does that mean?
well, the people that are gifted psychically can, the common phrase is read your mind. They're picking up on your energy. So if I'm evaluating a medium and she says, let's say she's reading me and I'm the sitter. I mean, I don't get read, but just as an example, uh, and she said, "Well, Bob, did you recently paint your bedroom?" And let's say I did. Somebody might say, "Wow, this is a great medium." I mean, she just, how did she know that? But how does that show that there's life after death? It shows that she can read my mind or read my energy, but it doesn't give any proof of survival. If, on the other hand, the medium is bringing through my deceased mom and gives me 5 or 6 really strong pieces of information, and it says, "Bob, I have to tell you, your mom is telling me to tell you that she likes that you just painted your bedroom blue." Well, that is a different thing because you've already established the discarnate entity that you're speaking with. So a lot of mediums, give a tremendous amount of psychic information, but they don't do so well by giving specific evidence communicated from a person that's in, this other realm. So, and
Gotcha.
we counsel when we're training our sitters, the people that are getting readings, on the differences between the two.
The sitter is the person getting the reading
Getting the
from one of
reading.
your.
Yeah.
All right, so this is what I'm fascinated by. So it's my understanding you have a rigorous criteria for mediums that you would send to
Yeah.
someone sitting down.
Yeah. Very
So
rigorous.
tell me about, can you talk about that? Like, what is that process?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, as you know, we are an all volunteer, not for profits.
Yeah,
Money never changes hands. So, I mean, the mediums cannot pay, to go through the process. It's free. And if they should happen to get certified, they can't pay to be listed, on our website. We do that automatically. And if you're
right,
not certified, we
right,
can't deal with you in any form. So what happens is we can't solicit any mediums to take part because that would dilute the integrity of the process. They have to come to us, and there are
right.
instructions on the website. They come to us. The first thing that we do is send them out a series of 4 or 5 questions designed to pick up any red flags, and if they answer them and send it back and it looks good, we will give them access to an 8-page application. And it's thorough. And there are people that for every 10 applications that we send out, maybe we get one that gets returned because, people think that this is going to be like a mail order reverend,
Sure.
send us $100, a
Right, right,
couple
right,
$100, we're going to send you a certificate. No,
right.
yeah. So it's obvious that's not what it is. After they complete the application, it goes to a committee. The committee as a group, reads through the application. And if they decide that this person has integrity and an ability, then the medium is invited to go through the certification process. During the process, the medium has to do 5 readings for 5 different trained sitters. When I say trained sitters, these are people that we educate in how to score evidence, what constitutes general versus specific information, what to say, what not to say when getting a reading. And they're taking notes during this whole thing. They're not scoring it at the time, but they're taking notes.
And and I'm sorry, Bob, but who's on
Yeah,
on the committee itself?
yeah.
Is it mediums that have been doing this for a while with you?
Yeah, no, we didn't want mediums involved in the process of the scoring or evaluating, because that is they might be biased, to some degree. So these are just members of the foundation that have a lot of strong knowledge about mediumship.
Okay.
So after the medium, we only do the mediums evaluate the mediums. They do 1 reading per day. Back years ago, we used to evaluate. The mediums used to do 5 readings in 1 day, and only 10% of the mediums were gaining certification. So I started to think that, well, maybe it's too tough. Maybe it's asking too much for a medium to do 5 back-to-back, readings. So we changed the process where now they only do 1 reading. And honestly, the statistics stayed the same. We still only get 10% pass. So I don't know that necessarily makes a difference. But in any event, we have, after the 5 readings are completed, we have 5 different methods of scoring, and they have to meet the minimum proficiency guidelines in each of the 5 categories, to get certified. So there's very little chance that somebody without extremely strong ability will not, will gain certification. It's statistically improbable. And over the years, many of the mediums that we have certified have gone on to become famous, which doesn't do us any good at all, because when a medium becomes famous, either through TV shows or books or
It just starts
TV.
to feel a little
Yeah,
slimy or something.
no, they do fewer and fewer readings, which is, we do this thing as a resource for the bereaved. So if you have a 4-year waiting list, it doesn't do any good. They
I see.
can charge ridiculous amounts of money. So it really is very little value, to us. But it is what it is. We're always trying to identify more and more mediums. So
How how many applications come in a year for this?
well, I don't know exactly, but what I can tell you is that we've been doing this since 2005, and since 2005 we certified 27 mediums. So
Oh,
that's so that's
20 years. You've
20
only got
years. So that's a little more than 1 per year.
wow. Okay. So
So
and you would you say, but I mean, would you say you've had 1,000 applicants?
over the years, well, let's see, with 20 years, maybe.
I got to imagine there's a lot of people out there thinking they're mediums
Yeah,
that they would
yeah,
want to apply.
yeah. It's not a tremendous amount, because remember, they see how tough the process is. But
Right.
so maybe you get it between 100 and 200 applicants per year.
Got it.
So
Wow.
but and I would like
Got it.
to identify more. Any people that don't have long. And recently, we certified 2 mediums, in back-to-back months, which was kind of improbable. If you want to hear something funny,
Yeah.
the first certification process we ever did in Long Island, we rented a ballroom in a hotel, and we had 9 mediums were being evaluated, which means we had 9 sitters, the people that were getting the readings, and we set up partitions in between the medium and the sitter, so the medium
This
couldn't
feels like
see.
the dating game, by the way, but go
Yeah,
ahead. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Like a
yeah.
this does feel like a game show.
Yeah, it was a little crazy, and the logistics are also, because we have to keep everybody on the same time schedule. But um, in that same um, session, the very first one that we did, 4 mediums gained certification. And I remember driving home that night and saying, wow, I really screwed this up, because there's no way that 4, should have passed in one. And of course, that's the only time that it's ever happened. And all 4 were from Long Island. So then I thought maybe there's something in the water,
Right.
and they've all went on to become famous, which is
What
also
was one of
kind
them,
of
the Long
important.
Island medium?
Yeah, one of them was.
Sure.
She's no longer certified by us, but yeah, she was one of them.
Yeah.
But Laurel and Jackson was there, Kim Russo, Bobby Allison. Yeah, those were the 4. So uh, yeah, it's a tedious process. But what we found, look, the mediumship is not a guaranteed process. Even the best mediums in the world sometimes don't make a connection. But what happens is that they're much more consistent than other mediums. So
Have you ever revoked anyone's access
well,
or certification, I should say?
yeah. I mean, the certification period is for a 4-year period, but we can revoke somebody's for ethical violations, or for reports that we're getting, that uh, they weren't accurate, on a consistent. It doesn't happen. There's only been a few over the years, but sometimes mediums' egos can, especially when they gain some fame, takes control. They're human,
Well, look,
and
yeah, man, people want to make money too. I get
yeah,
that.
yeah,
I get it. And it's
yeah,
like, sure, I can see it. They
yeah.
forget what they're doing here.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, oddly enough, I was thinking about this the other day, is that nobody from the foundation has ever been paid. And none of the people on the board, none of the executive, nobody ever got paid. But the only people connected to the foundation that benefit monetarily are the mediums, because once they go on our website as being certified, their business explodes. So I mean, the money's not changing hands directly, but
right.
they know.
It's a great, right. If that's your
Yeah,
game, that's a
yeah,
great thing to get
yeah,
into.
right.
Um, how have you, so I don't know if you had a chance to watch any of my nephew John's sort of, he's got over 1 million followers on TikTok. And what he does is he uses these spirit apps and spirit boxes. And I've turned them on. We've tested that. Like, I get nothing from them. And other people copycat him and do these things with him. What I'm always amazed at with him is that he gets is the personality that comes through, not the words that come through. But like, he'll go, oh, if we go to this location, there's a spirit there that always makes fun of me. And we go there, and sure as hell, it makes fun of him. And by name, John is an asshole. John is fat. John is like, and it's using radio waves to put these together, right? There's no
Yeah.
word bank stored or anything like that. It just happens with him. I had Kathy Nadal come and sit with him to see what she was feeling things in this. It's crazy. And I always say I'm like, dude, you're something going on with you that you're picking up. You're some sort of antenna or something that this works with.
Yeah.
Has technology made your job harder in evaluation for mediumship or for mediums? And especially like with these, now you could fill out a questionnaire that's 8 pages with AI.
Yeah.
Have you, like, how is the tech changing how you look at this world at
Well,
all, if at all?
yeah, yeah. Well, it's a good question, because yes, the tech has made our job much harder, because years ago, I mean, there was no internet, there was no Facebook, there were no, there wasn't a lot of social media. So, um, you couldn't research somebody. I mean, one of our mediums told me a year or two ago that he caught another medium, not connected to the foundation, but he was observing this medium, and she was giving a private reading to a sitter, and he was watching, and the medium on the left side of her computer screen was looking at the sitter, and on the right side of her computer screen was the sitter's Facebook page. And you know how much information is there. And
Yeah.
the medium was just spitting back information that he was reading. A total fraud. But the sitter said, "Wow, this medium is great." People don't realize how instant information can be got.
Oh, probably just over 10 years ago, I was with a magician. I'm a producer here in LA, and I was with a magician in New York City. And he was telling me, he goes, "You want us to get all we were having drinks." He was he was like a producer for magicians. So he creates a lot of the tricks and all this stuff. Young guy, he goes, watch, you want to see how we get all these drinks for free tonight? And I'm like, yeah, I'd love to see that. So he pulled out a deck of cards. I guess that's something magicians do. They always have a deck of cards on them.
Yeah.
And he does some tricks for me that are like wild. And I'm like, oh my God, that's great. But he's doing it in a way that there's a group of friends and some girls that are and guys all watching. And one of them catches the eye and he gets them over. So then he does a big trick for them. And Bob, this trick, whatever, and it's a pick a card trick, right? He flips over 8 cards or something. And he goes, on the last card, he goes, is that your card? And she's like, no, it's not. He goes, huh, do you recognize these other 7 numbers? These other 7 cards? And it was her phone number.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
The bar explodes. The manager comes over. He does a trick for the manager. The card's in his pocket, right? Because he's fast with his hands. When he first came over, he put cards in his pocket. He's like, your drinks are on me. And he goes, see? That's what he said, right? Like, talk about a grift. I mean, I go, how did you do it? Now, he would never tell me how he did the phone number trick.
Yeah.
But he did let on that, he's got another hand in his pocket where he can text somebody because he's talking to her the whole time. And he's getting her name and he's getting where she's from. And he basically got her phone number. Someone's listening, he's texting, and he gets it on his device.
Yeah.
Right. He's and the guy is that fast. I mean, he's a David Blaine. He was one of his producers at the time. I don't know where this guy is now, but he's that fast. And it blew me away. Right. I mean, it's just crazy, but that's tech. And now the tech is faster with AI. It's like, I can, you can pull anything up on anybody.
Yeah. And actually, Lloyd Auerbach is the president of the foundation.
I know we've had Lloyd on the show. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you know Lloyd. So the reason that Lloyd, one of the reasons Lloyd is an asset is in addition to being a parapsychologist, as you probably know, he's a mentalist. He does all these tricks. So he's a perfect person because of being in both worlds to help design experiments because he knows all the tricks. So scientists like to work with Lloyd because he can help them design the right protocol. The other thing about technology, though, is there seems to be more opportunities for people in this other dimension to communicate through electronic voice phenomena. Before it was the reel-to-reel tape recorders, and now
right.
everybody's got a phone, and a lot more people are picking up EVPs. So maybe it's easier. True. Maybe people in spirit like that.
That might be true. Yeah, I guess. I mean, that is true. That's funny, man. What is, all right, tell me something. What's the first thing you look for to okay, how should I ask this question? When you look at something new, are you looking at it from a point of view of how are they trying to pull wool over my eyes, or are you looking at it from an open mind perspective? So what is it that you're looking for out of the gate from somebody to be like, this is horse shit?
Well, it's not, you're talking about with mediums or
in this sort of space, yes.
Yeah. Well, I think with anything in this space, I always look to rule out physical explanations, and I still do that. So I had all these, different, occurrences, and everybody talks about signs and after-death communications and so forth. There are some people that believe everything, is a sign. I'm not one of those people. Certainly there are signs, but some are not. But after I can rule out, the physical explanations for something, then I can accept them. I mean, for instance, if people watch the Surviving Death series on Netflix, I mean, when they interviewed us, we gave them a film clip of a phenomena we shot that occurred in our kitchen. We were talking about our daughter, and we walked back into the house, and then as soon as I walked into the kitchen, we had 9 hi-hats in the kitchen, and it was like a 4th of July light show that was going on. And my wife takes out a camera and she's shooting it, and it goes on for like 10 minutes, and then it stops, and then I start to walk away, and she calls out again, and then it started and ran for another 10 minutes. And these were all, just everything was going on and off randomly.
You didn't put your house on the market immediately after that, and like,
No,
we're out of here?
no. I mean, I embrace these things when it
Okay.
happens, because if somebody's trying to communicate with me, I'm all ears. So the next morning, I had an electrician at the house at 9 o'clock, and I had him take down each one of the 9 hi-hat lights and examine them. And he didn't find anything wrong. So then I moved on to the light switches, and I had him take apart every light switch, and he found nothing wrong there. So, and I had lived in that house for 10 years prior to that. And then I lived there 10 years more, and nothing like that ever happened again. So I ruled out in my mind the physical explanations, and then I accepted that as a communication or sign, from my daughter. So I think that, that's important, because then you can really treasure and accept the extraordinary, things that happen. So I urge everybody to look at things that way. It's nothing wrong with being, open-minded skeptic about these things. With mediumship, I mean, there are, other things, to watch out for. I mean, I talk a lot about that in the book, but the most common thing is cold reading, because especially in Zoom or person to person. Look, I mean, if you're giving me a reading, I mean, you could guess approximately how old I am, and you say, Bob, do you have a grandmother in spirit? Well, shit, yeah, she'd be 120, and probably the oldest person on earth. So that's pretty. But if I was a sitter and I was doing a certification, I would have to mark that as a hit because it's a true statement. So if a statement's true, you have to mark it as a hit. But if you said to me, Bob, I have your grandmother Rebecca here, and I know that she was a bookkeeper and she made this special dish, and give me a bunch of evidence, well, that's a different story, and that should be weighted more heavily than that general hit. I mean, I could give you a reading and get 100% accuracy, but it's all going to be general bullshit.
Right. Right. You've been around it long enough to do it. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. So what we want to do is we want the mediums to produce very, very, specific evidence, and people might say, well, why do I hear that a lot? If the mediums are really doing readings, why are they talking about the color of your room or your baseball glove and stuff like that? Why aren't they talking about like the deeper issues? Because the answer is because if you die and you find yourself still alive in this other realm, the first thing that you want to do is let your loved ones know that you still exist. And the way to do that is through information that only they could know, that only you and them knew. So that's why they're giving all this seemingly mundane stuff. But
that's a good way to look at it. That's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah.
Bob, I got a couple more questions for you as we look ahead here. And first of all, thank you again for your time. It is really interesting. What's next for the Forever Family Foundation? How do you see moving into the future? What's going to change, or are there any other research things that you're looking into, or projects or partnerships on the horizon for that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a constant battle because I'm getting older. I'm retired from my real working job, whatever. So I have this time, but when you get older, you're trying to look for ways to slow down, and that just is impossible, and especially like everybody on the board to keep driving. I mean, we want to start holding some stuff in Europe. Whether it's conferences or retreats, we would like to have more retreats because they are amazingly helpful, to people in grief, but we keep them small because we want it to be an intimate experience at each retreat. And one of them was filmed, by Netflix in that documentary. But we limit it to 50 to 54 people, and that's it. I mean, I could have I have a couple of hundred people on the waiting list at each, but I can't accept them because there are 4 mediums we want everybody to experience and optimize their chances of getting readings. We have grief professionals. I'll give a talk about the evidence. We have metaphysical practitioners. It's all,
Right.
well-rounded. So I'd like to figure out a way to hold more. But one of the things, it's a logistical problem, is that I need certified mediums to populate all of these retreats, and there's just so many of them,
Right.
So I want, so that's something that I'd like to do. We just, we never used to do our own research. We used to promote the research of others. Last year, we did our own, research project that was funded by the Bigelow Institute, for the first time. So we got involved at that. I'm not particularly fond of doing research, but so I don't know if we'll continue. But
What was it? Can you talk about it? What was the research?
yeah, well, they wanted to. They were interested in the bigger picture of gleaning wisdom from the other side. In other words, not scoring mediumship accuracy. They wanted to know, if those on the other side are helping us, or do they do anything to prevent wars, or do they they take an interest in mankind and all that stuff. Very, very difficult project. I mean, we've got the best mediums, but um, it's difficult to score that information. If you tell me something, that's of profound wisdom, how do I tell you whether it's accurate or not? You know, I mean, if a medium gives me a statement, I could tell you it's yes or no or maybe. But I'm not in a position. So we had to use other methods, and we did a good job. And it was, our paper was selected as one of the, published, papers. But I think there's a lot of information, a lot of research that can be done with mediums. Now there's a lot of brain mapping. We've taken part in some of those. Scientists want to show the areas in the brain that either light up or go dark when a medium is involved in
Right.
spirit communication. They've done that with meditators and qigong, practitioners and all sorts of things like that.
Checking their magnetic field or something to
Yeah,
see if they have a higher they operate on a different wavelength maybe? Is that a thing?
yeah. Well, they also want to see if there's.
I could be making that up, Bob. I don't know if that's a thing or not.
Yeah, well, I mean that is part of it, but also they want to see if the brain plays a role in all this. Are we bypassing the brain, or are there areas of the brain that are like receptors to receive this information? So that's
Gotcha.
there.
No, it's great. What would be what's the biggest public perception about mediumship or life after, or survival or life after death that you would like to change in the public perception?
Um, Well, there's a lot of people that still think that the way I thought 22 years ago, that mediums are frauds, just by definition.
Right.
I remember playing golf with a buddy of mine before all this was started. Before my daughter died, and I was playing golf with him, and he was telling me he had just recently lost his wife to breast cancer, and he says, "Bob, I have to tell you something." I said, "What?" He said, "I went to a medium, and I remember I didn't know exactly what a medium was, but it sounded fishy to me, So he started telling me, but Mom, she told me all of these things about my wife that she couldn't possibly have known." And I just looked at him, probably with that glazed look in my eyes, the same look that people give me now, And I just gave him some lame answer. And I went home and said to my wife, I'm so worried about Kenny. He's going to some gypsy fortune teller. She's going to take all his money. He's overwhelmed with his grief. And look at my life now. It's like it's totally different. So yeah, I want to. That's why I always, everything that we do that involves science, I also bring in mediums, because I want people to understand that mediums have been, evaluated under controlled conditions by scientists under extremely, tight controls, and that, some of them truly can, do what they claim. But the general perception still is that, look, mediums are on the front line dealing with people with grief. There are no regulatory bodies. There are no certifications. There are no licenses. There are no ethical evaluations, no continuing education. I mean, tomorrow, Gary, you could go and say, "I'm Gary the medium." Put a sign on your door and start
Right.
charging people $300, for a reading,
Right.
and there's nobody's going to say boo about it. So I think that we have to educate the public, about the process of mediums, and we need some sort of organizing body that can regulate them.
Bob, you're not far off. I started a podcast about paranormal sort of documentation and investigation, and I sort of tell myself I'm a terrible ghost hunter, the world's worst ghost hunter. And my advice to most people is just like, you should move, get out of that house, don't walk down that street, avoid the basement. This is my thing, because I don't. If you're seeing ghosts, just it's time to go. Like it's just like that's kind of where I come from. Bob, listen, I thank you so much for your time. I think it's really interesting. I think, someone who has been through what you've been through and made a life out of, checking the validity of it has great value in terms of communication and spirit communication and what they are, and the data of the amount of people that you have met and gathered it is, you can't argue it. You can't argue that. It's just sort of like, how do they do that? And it's what they are, what spirits are. I like, that you talk about energy. I think most people, I feel, that are in this space that I find credible do say energy. It's like there is something with that. I can't wait to talk to somebody who says it's not, and something else that's like going to really blow my mind. But it's sort of like, see what they see. If I'm like, I think that might be a quack, but
Yeah.
I feel like I'm more on that train, because it makes the most sense. And we don't know how the mind works. We don't know, where the energy goes. It's got to go somewhere. It doesn't just disappear.
Right. Yeah, you're right. It doesn't die. So, it changes form.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, look at all the scientists take electrons and they fire them off at the speed of light in opposite directions. And then they change the spin of one, and instantly the spin of the other changes to match it. How is that possible? The universe is full of mysteries that we haven't even scratched the surface of. So.
No. So again, Bob, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate your time. It was really, really educational. Thank you, man. And again, Bob, author of The Medium Explosion. There we go. The Medium Explosion of My Life, Here and There, Robert Ginsberg. You can find those on Amazon, wherever books are sold. Those links are going to be in my bio and in my link tree. Bob, thank you again. It's really great. Really great.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Like, follow, and subscribe to the Splintered Spirits podcast if you want to hear more.